Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said earlier, the sad reality is there was no possibility, in my view, that the Republicans were going to convict. There weren't going to be 17. And as I said, the email I got from a listener complaining that, the left is losing their mind, they're apoplectic. I'm going, I don't think I knew many on the left who really believed he would be convicted. It was about getting out what happened. It's about telling the story. And for me, that's the most important part of it. And I think Jamie Raskin, as I said over the weekend, did a pretty good job of getting the testimony in of that congresswoman from out west without much of a squeal, saying that Trump said exactly what we've been saying. He said all along. Here to share some thoughts on what happened on Saturday and maybe where things go from this point forward. I've asked our good friend John Nichols to come talk with us. John is the national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. John, thanks for taking time for us.
It's an honor to be with you, my friend.
So let's talk about what happened on Saturday. Immediately I woke up and I heard, oh my goodness, we're going to get witnesses. And I'm happy because I want witnesses. I want people to come and testify. I want the American people to hear just how horrible things were on January 6th. And then the Democrats, did what Democrats do, and they kind of caved. Do you see it that way?
Sure. Look, I think that that you're right that you are never going to get 67 Republicans. Remember, we have never, ever convicted a president. And so if you think of impeachment only as a project to get a conviction, A, you don't understand it very well, and B, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. The reality is that impeachment is always about getting the record straight, getting the facts on the record. And history is really generous in this regard, because what do you remember Andrew Johnson for?
The impeachment. He was impeached.
That's right.
He wasn't convicted,
right.
But I remember him for a whole bunch of other things. He was horrible to the Indians. I mean, he was a
drunken, pathetic Southerner. Yeah, I know the whole bit. But we remember him for impeachment.
Right.
And you know what the interesting thing was? What do we remember Nixon for? I know that if you get older, you can remember more detail. But at the end of the day, what you remember is, oh, yeah, Nixon, he had to quit and flew out there because he was going to be impeached. Now, neither Johnson nor Nixon was held to account, nor anybody else has been impeached. But we remember that. And that's important. That's important in the short-term memory, i.e., we are talking about 2022, 2024, 2026, holding senators to account who failed to hold Trump to account. That's a big deal. But then we're also talking about long-term memory, that we have done something important to understanding the damage that Donald Trump did to America. So all good. Would I have loved to have seen witnesses? Absolutely. Would I have minded if this trial took another few days, another week? Not in a bit, not at all. And there's always my friends who will say, yeah, but we got to deal with all these other issues. Yeah, we sure do. But you know what? The Senate's out of session this week anyway. And so that was just a BS argument for people who, frankly, again, don't really have that much respect for the impeachment process. They want to just, get through it and get done with it and get on to the next thing.
No, so, I wanted to have those people's testimony. Every one of those representatives, I wanted to hear their horror stories. Like AOC did on Instagram. I want the American people to see just how close it came to our elected leaders being ripped to shreds in the halls of our Capitol. And I don't doubt, had they got a hold of someone, Republican or Democrat, they would have ripped them to shreds.
Well, half of those people in the Capitol were too uninformed to know whether it was a Republican or a Democrat anyway. There's some of the videos of them going through desks and thinking they were being sold out by somebody who was on their side because they didn't understand what the basics of the fight was about as regards certification of the election, showed that these people were there as kind of bleary-eyed Trump loyalists rather than folks who actually understood any of the dynamics. But I can tell you, you're right about getting testimony from individual members. That would have been good. From other folks as well, from staff at the Capitol, from workers at the Capitol, union members who had to do the awful, dirty work of cleaning up that disaster. But also something else. I wouldn't have minded seeing a couple hostile witnesses. I wouldn't have minded having Lindsey Graham called to testify about what he said the day after, or in the few days after January 6th, where he said, yeah, we were calling the White House. It was very hard to get Trump engaged because he thought of these people as, quote, allies on his journey. And so I would have loved to have seen Stacey Plaskett, for instance, or Jamie Raskin or somebody else grilling Lindsey Graham about the stuff he said. That would have been, I would have loved it. But we didn't get that. What we ended up with was a tremendous presentation by the House impeachment managers. I think Jamie Raskin's, some of what he had to say will go down in history as some of the best speeches in the House. Incredible prosecution by Stacey Plaskett from the Virgin Islands. Other people, Joe Negusset and others who did just fantastic work. So I'm very impressed by what they did. I think that a record has been laid down. And frankly, I hope that we do the most important final part of this, which is carry it forward. Franklin Roosevelt taught us a brilliant lesson. You use accountability to drive policy. And the fact of the matter is that we should keep talking about what Trump did. We should keep talking about what these senators did. Never forget, never forgive. Don't fall for the lie of unity and bipartisanship. That is just the tool by which they prevent us from moving forward. And, frankly, the last thing I'll say on it is, look, Trump was impeached for something horrible. It was a totally justified impeachment. But I wouldn't mind if he had been impeached for his handling of COVID. Look, there's plenty to impeach this guy for, and there's plenty to keep talking about as regards his high crimes and misdemeanors as the worst president in American history.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and this is, if you can't come to an impeachment on this, seriously, on this, then what is a high crime and misdemeanor? If, telling people to go march on the Capitol, if pointing that cannon that you've been loading for the last 4 years in that direction, and then pulling the trigger, and then doing nothing, being AWOL for those hours as the Capitol's being invaded, if you can't be impeached for that, I don't know what you do. And like I said, I think Raskin did a good job of getting that Jamie Herrera Butler's testimony in without actually putting her on the stand. I personally would have loved her and McCarthy and everybody else to tell that story of Trump basically going, I don't know, I guess this election means more to them than it does to you. I'm going, wait a minute. I'm about ready to be killed, and you're saying that it means more to the people who are going to kill me? I wanted to hear that story out loud.
Of course. And you wanted to hear McCarthy kind of, squirm, right? You wanted to see him trying to explain around it. And frankly, you should have wanted to see Lindsey Graham and other people, forced to talk about the fact that right after this occurred, they had a brief moment of honesty, right? Where they actually talked about both the trouble that they had with Trump on that day, i.e., he was clearly derelict in his duty. He clearly did not respond when people were begging him to respond. He clearly saw these people as his allies. And frankly, he wanted to see how it turned out before he stepped up and told them to back down. Yeah. And I mean, that I would have loved to have seen brought out. And the fact of the matter is that if that had been brought out, could you have moved a handful of additional senators? Probably. I'm going to give you, maybe you would have got one or two more. I'm willing to accept that. But at the end of the day, the most miserable person in the United States Senate, and I always put this guy above Josh Hawley, above Ted Cruz, above Ron Johnson, that's Mitch McConnell. Because Mitch McConnell is just the biggest liar that you're ever going to have in American politics.
Thank you.
In there, and on the days after this occurred, it's like, oh yeah, Trump is totally responsible. He's the worst guy around. And then he's like, yeah, but we don't have time to do this, in the period after the House votes impeachment. So you're going to have to put it into the next Senate, right? So, okay, that happens. McConnell, A, votes to acquit Trump. B, votes to say the whole thing is unconstitutional, even though he's the one who said, oh yeah, we don't have time to do it on the right timeline. And then C, at the end of the day, has the audacity to come down to that floor after the vote is done and to say, yep, basically everything Jamie Raskin said is right. Totally, this prosecution was exactly spot on. It nailed the issues, but we just couldn't do it because it didn't occur on the right timeline. When he was the guy who created the timeline.
Exactly. No courage points for him. None.
No, boy, if that was only the standard, I don't mind that he's a scorching coward, right? What I mind is that he is a calculating, awful human being, a truly, truly damaged, awful person who swears an oath to the Constitution of the United States and on a daily basis does everything in his power to undermine that oath.
Well, let's follow that for a second.
I hope I'm being clear on my attitude.
You're being completely clear, and which leads me to the next point. And I do want to come back to this in a second, but since you brought up Mitch McConnell, this is a perfect segue into this is where Democrats have to realize there's no reaching across the aisle. There's no extending the olive branch without getting it snatched out of your hand and you getting beaten with it. At some point, do the Democrats not realize that McConnell is never, let me repeat, never going to work in a bipartisan fashion? So at some point, they're going to have to do away with the filibuster. They're going to have to ram their agenda through because there's no help from Republicans. We saw that in this vote. There are not 10 people with any courage whatsoever in the Republican Party right now. It ain't happening in the Senate. So you're going to have to, whatever we're going to get is going to have to be rammed through.
That's exactly right. And look, I think that you and I understood that before the impeachment vote. We didn't need the impeachment vote to tell us this. It just put an exclamation mark on the end of it. I'm tired of the Lucy and the football metaphor, right? Because that doesn't begin to speak to it. The way McConnell works, if he was in the Lucy position, he would fill that football with explosives, right? And then invite Charlie Brown to come kick it, step away, and blow Charlie Brown up, right? It wouldn't be repeated fooling the other guy. It would be destroying the other guy. Mitch McConnell is a uniquely destructive person. And his cynicism is what makes it so dark, what makes it so incredibly awful. And let me just remind you, again, I, as somebody who would have loved to have seen these folks impeached for their handling of COVID, will remind you that it was Mitch McConnell who, from the spring of this year until the end of the year, blocked COVID relief because it didn't include liability protections for multinational corporations.
Yep, no immunity shield.
This is a truly horrible person. Something very bad happened to him at some point in his life that made him this way.
Yeah.
And anybody who suggests differently, anybody who imagines differently for a second is, kind of falling into a horrible, horrible trap where they will be guaranteed of disappointment. And so hopefully this is reinforced by, that the impeachment at least did that, at least reinforced that reality.
I don't think I needed that. I lived through the Obama years. I lived through his willingness to take us to the edge and look into the abyss, and with his hand in our lower back, ready to push us into the abyss. I lived through all that, and look, this, to be honest, this impeachment, this whole process was really a master's class on how to screw over the system and allow a criminal to go free. So let me ask you, as part of his speech, because I'm like, maybe that should be Exhibit A in the actual criminal trial, because I said this on Saturday and I stand by it. I'm okay with Donald Trump not being convicted as long as we take him into a court of law, we indict him, we try him, we convict him, and we lock his behind up.
Well, that's, that is fine. But I got bad news for you, Rick.
Not gonna happen either.
Very bad news for you. We live in a country where we fought a revolution against the divine right of kings, monarchy, and elites. And unfortunately, pretty much from the end of that revolution since, we have allowed the elites to run things economically and politically. And that is never so regularly reinforced as when it comes time to hold these people to account. And the fact of the matter is, Donald Trump walked away from literally inciting an insurrection against the country to try and maintain power. right? And now we are holding out the hope that a commission will, expose something about him, or that a prosecutor in Atlanta, or the Southern District of New York, or the Manhattan DA, or the New York Attorney General will somehow get him into court and bring him to trial and hold him to account. I want every one of those things to happen, but I am not unrealistic. I believe that at a fundamental level, what we have to recognize is A, you look for every avenue of accountability you can, you pursue them all as aggressively as you can, but you recognize at the end of the day, where the most important punishment of these people is to make them stand down politically, right? Because they're obsessed with getting the power to run our lives, getting political power. And so my big mission, I'd love to see Trump prosecuted, and I want it. I'm for it. I'm for it every way. But my big mission is to make sure that somehow we never see Ron Johnson's face in the U.S. Senate again. Somehow we never see Marco Rubio's face in the U.S. Senate again. Somehow we never see Blunt from Missouri's face, or Josh Hawley, and that we hold these people who shored Trump up to account. This is, I guess, my deeper point. My deeper point is, and I'm not a big partisan. I'm not, I don't obsess on Democrat and Republican or stuff like that. But this Republican Party has showed itself to be so dangerous, so open to being a destructive force in our politics, that I frankly think that the number one thing I'm interested in, I've got a big piece on this in The Nation tomorrow, is how do you make sure that the energy of this impeachment process is carried over into elections in 2022, 2024, and 2026.
And beyond. That we throw these bums out who are cowards,
yes,
at the minimum, and complicit on the other side. That simple. Last bit on this before I move on to the other thing I wanted to get to. The one thing I wish they would have gotten more into is, who funded this? Who brought these people to the Capitol on the 6th? Who funded all of the organizations that promoted this? I want to know the moneyed interests. Yeah, I know we got the guy who defecated on the ground. I know we got the guy who took a leak on the desk. I know we got those people. I want the people who pulled the strings and funded all this stuff, the people who Roger Stone got money from, the people who Giuliani got money from. I want those people because they're the really dangerous ones.
I'm with you. And again, this is the key. Too many times, over too many decades and centuries, the elites have gotten away with their crimes. And unfortunately, they have too much power in the Congress. They have too much power in the courts. They have too much power in our economy. This is a fundamental reality of this country, and we can't deny it. We can't be unrealistic about it. What we have to do is create a politics that says we are about punishing these people. And we shouldn't be uncomfortable with that.
I'm not.
One of the best things that has come out of impeachment is this notion, this understanding that when somebody says to you unity or bipartisanship, that means they don't want to do anything right. That's just bottom line. Unity and bipartisanship are watchwords for destruction, failure, moving backwards. And so if we take that in and we understand it, right? It doesn't mean that there can't be a heroic Republican. There can be. I give the Congresswoman from Washington State great credit, Jamie Herrera Butler, for what she did. I give Adam Kinzinger credit, a couple other people as well. Good for them, right? But they are outliers. They are political outliers. What I'm concerned about is the core of the crisis, the fundamental disease within the Republican Party at this point. And the fact is, anybody that winks and nods with that goes along with that, I don't think they should be in our politics.
I'm right there with you. It's pretty simple to me. We can have unity and bipartisanship once we have responsibility and accountability.
That's right.
But not until then. Before I let you go, I wanted to get your thoughts on Karen Lewis, the former president of the Chicago Teachers Union, who led that historic strike in 2012, passed recently. You had a piece on it. I wanted to get your thoughts on Karen Lewis and what she meant to teachers across the country and the movement that we've seen over these last several years.
I'm so glad that you turned us toward this positive topic, and remembering Karen Lewis is a positive thing. We mourn her passing, of course, But we should always understand that Karen Lewis was one of the most brilliant labor leaders of the modern era. She was a teacher. She was an opera buff. She was a great historian, a great thinker. There's so many things about her that was strong. She's truly a genius at the highest level. And yet her core genius was as an organizer. She was able to inspire a union to rise up and do what was necessary at a critical point to assert its power. And when she led that strike in 2012, that inspired the Red for Ed movement across this country, so many other militant teacher organizing initiatives in state after state after state, not merely by unions, but by teachers who are sometimes not that well organized, to have the courage to stand up and say, even without the full protection of a labor contract, that we are going to push for full funding of education, for protection for these kids, for protection for public education. She really was an inspiring leader. And I will tell you this, the gospel she preached was solidarity. And I knew her very well. We interacted in a lot of ways. We appeared together at a lot of events. And she came to national prominence with that 2012 strike, but she came to prominence in my life in 2011, because when we were involved in the Wisconsin uprising, which you came out and were a vital part of, my friend, when we were involved in the Wisconsin uprising, it was Karen Lewis, I think perhaps before anybody else, who was on the phone saying, how can we help? What can we do? Is our national union doing enough? Are other unions doing enough? What do you need? What has to happen? And I can tell you, she was there in solidarity from day one with absolute militant support for the Wisconsin uprising. And the same was true every other time that a union hit the picket line or that a union was out, in some kind of struggle. I loved her. I loved her for who she was. I loved her for how she embraced the promise of organized labor. And I'm going to tell you something. And this is one of the greatest things about organized labor. Organized labor remembers. It has a long memory. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we will remember Karen Lewis as we remember John L. Lewis and Joe Hill. And, I could give you 100 other names, Mother Jones. Karen Lewis fits in that long tradition. And I just want us to keep talking about her, keep understanding her. And I know what she would tell us, because I was with her in enough situations to see this. I know what she would tell us is, don't mourn, organize.
And that is it. And we had the fortune to interview her here on this program several times over the years, and she was a fantastic person and an incredible, passionate leader, and she will be missed. But as you said, don't mourn. We need to organize. We got a lot of work to do. John, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. Always great talking to you, my friend.
Honor to be with you as always, brother. Solidarity.
Solidarity. Our good friend John Nichols, national affairs correspondent there at The Nation magazine. We'll get links out to all of his pieces so you can take a look at it. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
We're working people.